back to the Biblical Preaching Podcast. We're here again together, myself and Peter. As we're recording this on tomorrow, both of us are preaching out in different churches.
Is that a thing? Preaching out?
I wasn't entirely sure what to call it. I was just going to say guest preaching, but we're preaching
Yep.
kind of away from our home church. And we were just thinking, well, let's chat a bit and have this podcast about what that's like and about how to do that as well as possible. So as you kind of have been invited, Peter, it's something we both do.
Mm-hmm.
Not all the time, but occasionally enough to sort of warrant a conversation like this. So what things, or maybe what's kind of one of the first things that come to your mind when you are asked or invited, or sometimes it's a response to a distress signal. Please, we need someone to come, and you're sort of taking that opportunity. What's one of the first things that comes into your mind as you're thinking, okay, guest preaching? What is it? What do we do?
Well, I think the immediate challenge is that you're preaching in a setting that is unfamiliar to people that are less familiar or unfamiliar. And so if I'm preaching in my home church, I know the people, I know the issues, I'm dealing with them.
Yeah.
If I'm guest preaching, it's somebody else's church.
Yeah.
So I want to honor the leadership there and, not kind of come in and drop a hand grenade. That's kind of maybe an initial thought is go in to support, go in to help the church. Now we can come back to that. There are certainly things that maybe you can say as a guest preacher that would be harder to say if you're local, if it's your own church. But my mindset when I'm going to a church is I'm going to serve the leaders who've asked me to come.
Yeah.
So therefore I want to find out from them what they're expecting. So I want to know as much as I can find out in a phone call or by email, whatever interaction I can have. What Bible version do you use? What's the format of the service? How long do you want me to speak for?
Yeah.
And even what have you been having recently? Are you in the midst of a series and I'm just stepping in as a one-off? It's helpful to know where they've been. So if they've had a series in John and I'm coming in mid-series, it doesn't make sense for me to preach from John or even the synoptics. I'm probably going to go somewhere else in the Bible, just stay away from the thing that they're doing at the moment. So I want to find out as much as I can even before the day so that I can choose wisely what I'm going to preach and I can prepare with some sense of awareness of what kind of church is this? What are some of the issues they're struggling with? What are some of the features, or what type of season is it as a church? Just as much awareness as I can get from the person that I speak to on the phone, maybe visit the website, just recognizing I don't know these people. And while the Bible doesn't change, the audience does, and good preaching has to land in their lives. So I want to find out as much as I can.
Yeah, I was thinking about it's almost. I'm trying to find out sort of what is their usual tone as well of both of their Sunday services, but the preacher. So not usually, not always. We'll kind of get invitations because we know someone in the church, we know the pastor, or know kind of some of the elders of the church, and so that's sometimes a bit easier because we know the person, so we know their kind of tone. But again, it's not that we then have to fit into that. We're not trying to be the main preacher, kind of replace the main preacher in exactly the same way, but just knowing how they preach, or the tone of the series, kind of like you say, where they are even in the series or in a season. It's just helpful to say, okay, well, I don't want to be on purpose jarring. Yeah. So I recently spoke at a church away day, and it's actually it's a face-to-face conversation with the pastor, so we were able to go a little bit deeper in terms of kind of how the church started, because it was a fairly new church, but how it's been, what he's preaching, even what he's been trying to communicate, and how in the leading up to the couple of months. So that was a great face-to-face. So we, in an email conversation, maybe in a church that you don't know at all, it's a bit more, we've been going through John's Gospel. It's a spare week because people are away, and that's kind of all you've got.
Yeah.
But in this face-to-face, he was, able to say, well, actually, these are the issues I've been trying to address, and this is what almost kind of I'd like you to go into this area, perhaps, even though it's a free choice. But that sort of tone and how, and yeah, I appreciate that, how I can support the people support the leaders that I'm preaching to, but also, yeah, just kind of be a new voice.
I want them to be thankful after, like not in a sort of I need affirmation sense, but they've invited me into their world. It's their ministry. And if I go in and blow it up, they're going to be the ones picking up the pieces.
Yeah.
So I want to be really sensitive to that. Now, if I've had a conversation and they're saying we really could use encouragement in this specific area, great, I'm going to do that. But I don't want to sort of wade in and stir up a hornet's nest that they're not going to appreciate. So a touchy issue or a sort of secondary issue, I'm not going to preach about that in a guest setting. Whereas in my own church, I might think, no, it's the right thing for me to present this. This is my view. This is what we're going to, So secondary issues, things like spiritual gifts, role of women in the church, timing of creation, sequence of eschatology, those kinds of issues are all important. They're all biblical, but they're probably not my place to stir when I'm visiting a church. And so I tend to sort of lean slightly towards safer ground, if you like.
Yeah.
But at the same time, recognize that sometimes as a guest, you can say something that would be very hard to say if you're on the inside. And so it's not just play it safe, play it safe. It's, be wise, be careful, be sensitive. But is there a sense in which you're going to deal with a text that could poke a little bit? Then, do it.
Yeah.
So it's trying to get that balance right.
Yeah, and one of the differences that can be with guest preaching is whether they give you a passage or not.
Absolutely.
So the place I'm preaching tomorrow, they've given me, it's a summer series in the Psalms, and they said, well, you're Psalm 25. So I've been preparing and enjoying Psalm 25, and that's, for me, that it's almost easier for me to be given something, because you're sort of, okay, well, that's what I'm going to do. But quite often, probably more often with guest preaching, it's a free choice.
Yeah.
And how do you go about kind of choosing what to do? You've kind of got, well, the whole Bible to do, and you've got kind of a one-off kind of thing. You've got like a vast kind of bank of messages on different things. Do you just sort of like look through your filing cabinet, or do you how do you sort of go about that?
I don't mind re-preaching a message. So if I choose to re-preach something, then I want to spend some time looking at the text, looking at my outline, and at least praying in terms of preaching this here in this one specific location, rather than just preaching it generically as much as possible. It may end up being very similar to how I preached it somewhere else, but I want to, for my own sake and for theirs, at least pray through it and think in terms of, okay, what kind of setting, what kind of church, what could their challenges be, that sort of thing. So how do I pick? I tend to think about, okay, what's not appropriate? If they're in John, okay, that wipes out all my John options.
Yeah.
So sort of eliminate and then think, okay, what am I motivated to preach? What would make sense in terms of the season? What would make sense in terms of what I know of that church? Or even what would make sense in terms of my schedule? Because honestly, sometimes I'm preaching somewhere else, but I've also got to preach in my church. And so it's not unusual for me to think, well, in the morning, I'm at another church as a guest. I've got a free choice. In the afternoon, I'm at my own church. I don't have a free choice. Do I preach the same thing so that I'm in that message? Yeah. And so sometimes I'll do that, but sometimes it's a passage where I think, no, I can't preach that as a standalone, and I'll do something else. Yeah. So it's, you're weighing up various factors and then making a choice. There's one place I've been to 2 or 3 times. My children laugh about this. For some reason, it makes me change my mind. And so I remember the first time I was planning to preach something in Corinthians, and as I was sat there, I just had this sense that I just don't feel right. Wow. And it wasn't like I've preached that here before. That's a feeling I've had in some places. I've been here before. Have I preached this passage? That would be awkward. It wasn't that, but it's just a real sense that, no, I'm just going to preach John 3. So I switched to John 3 and sort of almost freestyled it, but it seemed to work fine, and that's not my normal pattern. Next time I was at this church, maybe 2 years later, had exactly the same feeling.
Wow, no way.
And so I just do John 4 then. So I got the slowest series
the
ever.
next in our series.
Yeah, it's like this sort of every 2 years you get the next installment. But that's unusual. Most places, you pick in advance, you pray, you prepare, you go. But then once you're there, there's a whole load of learning going on. So yeah, I can talk to the person on the phone 2 months ahead or 3 days ahead whenever I'm invited and get some information from them. But when I arrive, that's where you can really start. Go, oh, okay, there's more children than I expected, or oh, this is more ethnically mixed than I expected, or whatever. And sometimes, the sound guy giving you the microphone can be really helpful. Not always. Mike's often on sound when I'm preaching at our church, but sometimes I'll ask the sound person as I'm getting the mic off them. Hey, tell me about the church, and you won't get much if you ask that question. But the follow up, I'll often say, is there a typical job? What do you mean typical? Like, are there a number of people that do the same thing in this church? Like doctors, nurses, lots of people in a hospital? No, got loads of teachers here. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
It's that little bit of information that I'm not going to spot watching people sing, but it's given me something more so that then in an illustration or in some part of the message, if I can tie that in, it just adds a little bit of glue between me and them.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing, particularly in application, you're sort of in the sort of venues of application is, when you're applying this in your school or in your office or in your, it's that kind of thing that actually can help land. And those conversations, the pre-service conversations that are very different in home, like in home church, pre-service or pre-preaching conversations in home church tend to be a bit more practical. Do we have enough chairs or whatever? But when you're guest preaching, those sort of pre-service conversations, I find this quite hard. Not just because I'm a bit of an introvert, but just I'm thinking, right, I'm just thinking so much about, okay, I'm in a new place, and that makes me nervous anyway, and I'm trying to kind of focus on I need to kind of preach and everything, but then almost forcing myself in a sense to try and have those kind of conversations that you're describing can actually be really valuable to feed in when you're in a place that you don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting how sort of the traditional, and this, we're preaching in all sorts of settings and not all traditional at all, but the traditional pattern is you arrive at a church, you get pulled into a side room to pray with the elders or the pastor and associate or whatever, and then you sit on the front row.
Yeah.
And I actually don't like any of that. Like I'll happily do it, but given the choice, I'd rather be chatting with people in that half an hour before the service because I'm really gaining a lot of information. And then if possible, I'd rather not sit on the front row because you can't see a thing.
Yeah.
And I know I'm pretty tall. I'm blocking people's view as well, which is always awkward. So I'd much rather sit several rows back or off to the side so I can sort of get more of a feel for the congregation.
Yeah.
Just you can, as you look around, you notice, there's a lot of parents with small children, or there's a lot of older folks, or there's a lot of whatever, it's just that little bit of tweaking. It doesn't massively change your message, but it does affect a little bit how you preach.
Yeah. But that's how, like, in everything, whenever in all the episodes that we've talked about anything about kind of process and preparation and even preaching, is it sort of being responsive to and trusting God in the whole process, like that comes out all the time. And certainly guest preaching would be a place where you just have to be very trusting of the Lord and say, okay, Lord, but that's like how the Spirit kind of, I think, can work in sometimes in how we watch, how we listen, and how we talk. It's saying, okay, Lord, what are you showing me about these people? And that's a great prayer that I haven't really thought about before. That maybe I'll pray that tomorrow. Yeah. Like, as I'm going in, new place. Okay, Lord, what are you, give me conversations, give me, like, show me things, but then help me to sort of, like, show me kind of
assimilate it.
Yeah. And
let it out.
Yeah. And but really it feels even more trusting to go and do that with people in a church that you don't know.
Yeah. I think being a guest preacher is a real privilege, and sometimes a real joy. You get a little taste of a different church, different culture. Sometimes you'll get a really profound conversation with someone who just resonated with what you said, and you can come away thinking, yeah, that sermon, okay, but that conversation, wow, thank you, Lord. But there's a reverse side to that, and that is that it's sort of a fake positive, in the sense that generally, depends on the church, but generally speaking, people aren't going to come and dump negative thoughts on you at the end. Generally, they're going to be positive and polite and friendly and thankful. And so I do want to check my own heart that I don't just sort of feed off the positive comments. They're being polite. They're glad you came. They enjoyed it. That's nice. Praise the Lord for that. But I don't want to sort of default into a ministry that feeds off of the positive comments. And I think you can do that if you're a guest speaker way more than you are preaching in your own church, which there's various reasons for that. But one of the dangers is that you can start to believe the hype of people that are actually just being polite.
Yeah.
So I appreciate people's politeness and friendliness and gratitude. That's very different than my own church, where I finish preaching and someone might come up to me and say, I've got a problem with this, or I've got a problem with that. And they totally ignore the sermon. But that's the privilege of leadership. That in my own church, I don't get 25,
polite handshakes.
Yeah. I get people asking questions about tomorrow and what's the plan for Wednesday, and do we need more chairs over here or whatever. And it's that kind of difference that I think sometimes you could feel drawn to the guest thing and just kind of crave that positive experience. I want to view it humbly as an opportunity to serve and help, but then get back where my roots are.
Yeah, I was just thinking too, and I know you've got a biblical preaching for you, kind of Bible verse coming up. I was just thinking, what about for people receiving guest preachers?
Yeah.
Kind of how can we receive guest preachers well? And one of them is like, please do the quote unquote kind of polite thing and be grateful. Like, don't just don't take the opportunity with guest preachers to say, okay, this is my time to be able to sort of dump all my issues with the pastor. I'm so glad you're preaching because the pastor is, and just sort of like, please don't do that. That is not appropriate and not particularly enjoyable for anyone. But obviously there might be opportunities that if you're able to talk with the guest preacher afterwards, share what was helpful. And if there were things that kind of spoke in a particular way because there were issues, then be as honest as kind of is appropriate. But just be the thankfulness. We don't, guest preachers don't just want polite thankfulness, but actual gratitude,
genuine conversations.
And conversation about this will speak to me this week, or even talking to the guest preacher about how they're doing, about how their family, their ministry as well can be a real joy.
I always appreciate it when people tell me to pass on their thanks to my wife. I like that.
Yeah, that's nice.
Please thank your wife for letting you be with us.
Yeah.
Because obviously it's cost her as well.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's thoughtful. Yeah, I think also just, as a listener, this is true whether it's your own pastor, regular preacher, or a guest preacher. How do you prepare your heart for that? Because the best thing is when people are ready to hear.
Yeah.
So coming in, prayerful, prepared, eager to hear what the Bible says, but also ready to check the scriptures to make sure that what you're saying is true. And that kind of eagerness is a privilege to preach to. Much rather have that than people that are flat.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And cold. But I just I thought this is a bit of an opportunity to read a verse I don't often read, but I like this just as a thought. Acts chapter 13, verse 15. Paul and Barnabas come to Antioch, Pisidian Antioch, up in what we would call Turkey. And it says, after the reading from the law and the prophets, the rulers of the synagogue sent a message to them. There's a lot of warning. So it's not like
we're on the way.
We phoned you 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
It's like, no, we've just had the reading now. Brothers, if you have any word of encouragement for the people, say it. And so Paul stood up and preached. That's the ultimate no warning sermon as a guest, but probably standard practice. But I just love that way of describing it. If you have any word of encouragement for the people, and I think that might not be a bad way to think about guest preaching. Essentially, do you have a word of encouragement for them? Come on in, encourage, build up, point them to Jesus, preach in such a way that it's not spiky, it's not provocative, it's not unnecessarily awkward or whatever. There may be an element where there's something else, but as a general tone, a word of encouragement. What a privilege.
Yeah, that's great. Good. Well, we'll pray that we'll do that tomorrow, both of us. And we're grateful again that you are with us, listening to us on the Biblical Preaching Podcast. We'll see you again for another episode soon.
And feel free to share stories. Don't name names, but there's a lot of funny things that happen when you're a guest preacher. So if you want to share, sort of carefully, be careful of names and places, but stories can kind of stimulate others as well. We want this to be a conversation. And so hopefully we'll get some amusing, encouraging, helpful stories shared in response to this one.
Look forward to that.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate every positive review, like, share, and comment. And thank you for praying for us. We hope you will join us again next time on the Biblical Preaching Podcast.